Alright, so now we're in Nuke, and let's just have a look at the two base layers that we have rendered out from Photoshop. So we have the base layer itself with all of our triplanar textures, the water, the environment light, and just everything colored in. And we have our distant light, which we have separated and we will animate slightly in Nuke. So let's start doing that. Let's give ourselves a little bit more space here. And basically I will want to reveal and obscure certain areas of this light here. So first of all, I will create a version of this really quickly without any of the light. So in order to do that, I will create a keyer. And so this, if we click 1 to switch the viewer to this node, what this does is it selects our luminance values from our RGB channels and puts them into alpha. So if here we change to alpha, we can see that it is exactly the same as our RGB. And we can switch between the alpha and RGB back and forth by just clicking A on the keyboard. So again, in this luminance key, we can define exactly how much of the image we want to be cut out for the alpha. So we'll probably just want the highlights themselves. Let's go back to RGB, and here let's just create a grade node by clicking tab and typing in grade, and we'll just connect this here. And here at the side we have a little arrow which comes out as mask, and let's just connect that to the luminance key. And here let's just have a look at lowering the gain. So not much is happening. It's gone slightly darker, but what we can do is, with this selected, create a grade here that will pipe into our mask, and for this grade we'll just switch it to alpha and we'll make it brighter here. So what this does is this makes the alpha brighter and increases our selection for the mask. So here let's just tone this down a little bit. And this one, if we double click to then change this one's settings, we'll increase a lot here. And I'm not aiming for this to be very pretty. I'm just trying to cut out these lights or this light hitting certain places quite roughly. Okay. So that will do for now. And I think here on the water we can just create a roto paint node, select our clone stamp brush, and by clicking Control and dragging and then clicking Shift and dragging, we can adjust our cursor. And let's just paint this in to paint out these lights that we have got here. There are cleaner ways of doing this, but this is very quick and the results will be quite satisfactory. So let's just do it like this. Because a lot of these things will not be noticed by anyone looking at the shot. So there's not too much reason to worry. Okay. Paint all of that out. So now we have our lit version. And let's just disable all of these settings here. So we have our lit version and we have our shadowed version. And what we want to do is we want to create some masks that we can then animate and combine these through. So let's just clean up slightly here. We'll put this like this. And let's create a merge node. And let's pipe in this as our background and this shadow as our foreground. And so currently it doesn't quite work, but what we will do is we'll create a roto and plug this into the side as a mask. And we have our spline here, the bezier. and we can just make a quick shape like so. And let's just create a reformat node. And for the output format, let's select 4000 by 2000, which comes from our render here. So here we want to select the same format as well. And here let's plug the background of the roto into that. And here for our shadowed version, we will want to create a shuffle node and make the alpha white. So now here the alpha is white and it merges perfectly over through this roto. So what we can do is select the roto and create a blur node, and let's just increase the size, do something like this. But if we go to our first frame, we'll notice a slight problem here appearing. So actually in my roto paint node, I need to make sure that the life of all of these brush strokes is set to, let's just select them all by clicking Ctrl+A, and let's just click on this and set it to all frames. So this painting will exist for all of those frames instead of just frame 50. So now if we maybe take our first frame, and here this roto can be selected and keyframed by clicking this button to set a key on the current frame. And let's go to our last frame and let's select all of these and maybe move it like this. And now if we create a playback, we can see that we have some movement. It looks like a cloud is moving out of the sunlight. So what we can do is, for example, take this roto again, and maybe here on the first frame, let's expand it somewhat. We'll do this, and then on the last frame, we'll have it starting to cover up this area. So now we are getting a little bit more interesting action going on here. And of course, we can do this multiple times. Let's go to our first frame again, and let's go to this roto. And here maybe let's put in something like this. And that's a keyframe. Let's go to our last frame. And let's do something like this here. The trick is to make sure that whatever movement you're doing isn't too big. Here you can make it slightly softer by holding down Control and dragging on these points and doing something like this. So we don't want for the clouds to seem like they're moving too fast, which this currently is. It is, after all, only 2 seconds that pass in this shot. So let's bring this back a bit. Do this. Here on the first frame, let's expand it a little bit more. Okay, that's quite interesting. Then here, let's create one like this. And on the last frame, let's move it up a bit. So now hopefully it looks like there are clouds moving this entire way. And you can play around with this quite a lot, but I think this is good enough for just this demonstration. So now what we will be doing is, instead of projecting a stationary image in Clarice, we will be projecting an animated image, which will add a little bit of extra life, even though it will be subtle. So just to show how it will work, let's take our DMP base and let's create a merge node and plug the base into B and our distant light into A like this. And if you click Control and hold it down and click on one of these connecting lines, you can square them off to make it slightly neater. So actually we can do it slightly differently. We can create a grade node here and plug this in here and plug the mask into our distant light instead. And let's create another shuffle node. And currently our alpha is this roto that we had here, but instead if we, in the shuffle node, shuffle the alpha into the red channel, which is again the same as the blue and the green as it's a black and white image, our alpha also becomes the same. So now let's have a look at this mask, and let's increase the gain. And we can see that as we are increasing the gain, we are getting it just happening in the areas covered by this mask. So let's put this up to something nice and high. Okay, and let's just expand this a little bit. Go back to the start. And let's play. And so now we are getting quite a cool effect. It kind of looks like the light is being obscured by clouds or some other kind of shapes. And even though our render here wasn't perfect, we got something to work nice. And we will project this in Clarice and get the same effect there on a moving camera sequence. So I think we will maybe want to slow down this movement of the clouds even more, but I will leave that up to you in your own project, because there's quite a lot of creative license when it comes to stuff like this. For now, let's take what we have here. Okay, and we'll create a right node. And we will go into our renders folder, into Nuke, for renders that are coming out of Nuke. And we will call this one DMP Distant Anim. And in the folder title I kept frame 50 because even though this is a sequence, this will be rendered from frame 50 of the camera in Clarice. And let's just render this out here using 2 hashtags for our frame number and whatever format we would like to render. So let's go with TIFF. And let's select 16-bit for the data type. And now let's click render. And here for the frame range, we'll input 1 to 50. And let's click OK. Alright, next up, let's have a look at animating some of our overpainted elements. So here I've brought in my layer with all of the people. And here I have added a pre-mult node so that it multiplies the alpha with the RGB and we just get a cutout of our people. In addition, I've brought in my shanties that I overpainted, such as these. And I've brought in the boats that I painted in, as well as my painting here at the top. Just so I have everything within this one Nuke script. So first of all, we'll begin by taking maybe our shanties and what I would like to do is I'd like to add a little bit of movement to some of these tarps. So it looks like maybe they're moving a little bit in the wind. Maybe there's a lot of movement underneath them that makes them move. Something like that, you know, just to have a little bit of extra life in our painting by adding like some very subtle movement that will not even be noticeable, but it'll just look slightly more natural than if these were all stationary. So let's pre-mold this first of all. And let's create a shuffle copy node. And we'll plug our DMP into slot number 1. And then we will create a noise. And let's have a look at this. So this is just a procedurally created noise that we can animate to add some movement to it, and then we can take that movement and apply it to our matte painting. So let's have a look at the techniques here. So here for this scale, maybe let's drop this down to 50. I think I'd maybe like to stretch this noise sideways a little bit, as that is sort of the perspective of all of my shanties. So just to match that a little bit. So here by clicking this number 2, we can have the option to change these two X and Y sizes individually. So let's just stretch it a bit in X and reduce a little bit in Y. And then with Z, we can control this movement through the Z axis. So if you imagine this noise is a 2D noise, but there's a third dimension that passes through the image in terms of Z. So what we can later do is animate things like this, and then take this movement and apply it to our other layers. The other settings for now we'll leave as they are. And let's just create a grade node. And just having it in the RGB channels is enough. And let's just lower the gamma in order to increase the contrast a bit. Okay, maybe a little bit more. Sort of, I want to achieve a hard pattern, maybe like this, just so that the bits that are white will move one way and the bits that are black won't, or will move another way, just so I can separate it sort of by region maybe. I don't know, you can play around with this quite a lot, and this is just a technique I found that worked for these shanties. So let's maybe create a reformat, and we'll reformat it to be the same resolution as our matte painting. And let's plug this into slot number 2. And what we'll do next is we'll create an iDistort node. But before that, actually, let's go into our shuffle copy node and copy our RGBA or RGB channels into the forward layer of our option number 1. So now by doing this, these get sent across here and here to the forward channel. So now we have put the R and the G values into the U and the V. Okay, and now if we go to iDistort and select forward for the UV channels, we can see that we're getting quite a lot of distortion that is based on our noise. So for example, in my noise, if I change something, this distortion changes in my image as well, because it's deriving movement from the movement of the noise, or from the positions of the noise pixels. So what we can do is we can turn this down, I'd say quite a lot, maybe to that much, And now let's have a look. Oh, sorry, forgot one thing. Forgot to animate this noise. So let's just see, for example, if we right click on our Z value here and just set key at where it is, and on frame 50, let's change this to, okay, let's have a look what would be realistic. Okay, maybe 1. And now let's have a look. Okay, as you can see, we have parts of our painting moving, right? But this is a little bit too much. Actually, what we could do is we could take our little comp here of our base layers and move this maybe here. Let's take this one, move it here. And merge the two, just so we see our result as it would look all together. So you want to plug the background into the B and the foreground into the A. And now we have them together. So let's have a look at the movement. Okay, so we can see a little bit. And it's meant to be very subtle. Here, for example, you can see. But this is still a little bit too much, I would say. Let's go to frame 50. And in our noise here, let's reduce the Z value to maybe 0.5, so we get a slower movement, as this animation will be slower. And in the eye distort, maybe let's reduce it just by a little bit more. And let's have a look now. Oops. I think this is slightly better, as this is quite a reasonable amount of wind to imagine. You know, they're slightly moving. I don't want to make it too obvious, just some very subtle effect. And this is probably still a little bit too strong, but I fear that if I make it any weaker, it might not be very visible in the tutorial for you guys. But okay, maybe it's a slightly windy day. So I think I quite like that. And the cool thing about this is that, say you like most of your animation and you don't want to change it too much, but there's maybe just one spot that is bothering you. Okay, so let's say we don't like the movement of these elements here. Maybe it's a little bit weird. So what we can do is we can plug in a roto and into the mask here, and we'll just select this, and let's copy this reformat of our DMP format and just plug it into the background. And now our mask is only affecting this bit, but we want the inverse of that. So what we can do is we can go into a roto and invert the shape. And so now this applies color 1, which is white, to the inverted selection, so everything outside of it. So now we have everything animated except this little bit. So that's how you can control and sort of manipulate the results to have the little bits that you want, and the ones that don't look good, you can throw them out. So next up, let's move on to animating some people as well.